linguistics. In today's lecture we are going to discuss speech perception. What do we mean by speech perception? It is the understanding of speech. So there are two forms of language processing. The first is the one which I have discussed in lecture number 9, which is language production. And there is language perception, understanding speech. Here we have an illustration for speech perception. We have, if you read it from the right to the left, we have someone, he is speaking, he is giving a auditory system. What happens inside the mind of the hearer? He hears phonological representation, he starts to build lexical selection, and starts to build the syntactic representation in order to understand the speech. So if you read this from the right to the left, we are going to have an overview of the processes involved in language perception. The contents of today's lecture are: first, perceiving speech, the phonemic inventory and speech perception, constructive speech perception and phonological illusions. Again, we are not going to discuss phonological illusions, so I'm going to correct this. Alright, so we're just going to discuss speech perception. Then we're going to discuss bottom-up and top-down information. How are they used while speech perception? And finally, we are going to discuss suprasegmental information in the signal. In the second part, we are going to discuss the role of orthography in understanding written texts. So as you are reading, how the orthography of the language plays a role in your understanding, in your perception of the written texts as you are reading. So we are discussing language perception, which can be divided into two parts: the perception of speech and the perception of written texts. Okay, that's listening and reading. Listening is the perception of speech, reading is the perception of written texts. Perceiving speech. There are facts to consider on this matter. The first is the phonemic inventory and speech perception. What do we mean by the phonemic inventory? It is the set of sounds of a language. A language such as Arabic has phonemes, such as a, such as ba, ta, da, kha, etc. These are called phonemes. Don't mix them with letters. Phonemes are a bit different to letters. I think you have already taken phonetics and phonology, and by this time you should be able to tell what is the meaning of phonemic inventory. This is just a reminder. Knowledge of the phonemic inventory of a language is necessary for perception. In order to understand the language well, you have to study, you have to be aware of its phonemic inventory. And this explains why is it easier for beginning language learners to understand material with the subtitles. If you are watching a movie in English, which has subtitles in English as well, sometimes you are not able to understand some of the words, but when you read them, you say, yes, I know the meaning of this word, I have taken it before, I know what does it mean. But as you are listening to it, because you are not fully competent of the phonological system of English, you are not able to tell the meaning of this word. But as you are reading it and listening to it at the same time, it is easier for you to tell the meaning of the word if you have already taken, or if you have already been exposed to its meaning. The second fact in perceiving speech is constructive speech perception. What do we mean by constructive speech perception? As you are listening, you are using extra information, such as lip movement. Sometimes the auditory detail is not clear. You need extra information, such as the lip movement. As the mouth is moving, you are using, even without you knowing this, sometimes while you are having a conversation with someone, you are concentrating on his lip movement in order to understand better. So this is called constructive speech perception. You are not just using the auditory details. You are not using just the sound produced. You are using more than that. You are using the lip movement, for example. You are using extra forms of information which we are going to look at in a moment. So the perception system is constructive because it uses additional information to the signal, such as lip movement and the perception of speech. So as you are trying to understand speech, you are using more than just the sound itself produced by the speaker. We have bottom-up and top-down processing. We have two processes. We have two kinds of information which you can use as you are listening to someone in order to understand what is he saying exactly. So we have bottom-up processing. What do we mean by bottom-up processing? It is the use of acoustic signal, which is phonemes. So as the speaker is speaking, you are listening to the phonemes in order to understand speech. This is clear. This is self-explanatory. There's no need to explain this more, because as you are speaking to someone, you are listening to what is he saying. You are listening to the sound in order to understand. This is called bottom-up processing. Okay. The second kind of information which you use in order to understand speech is top-down information. Top-down information is the context. So the contextual information is used in order to understand speech. So sometimes a speaker is speaking, but you are not able to understand him well. You make use of the context in order to understand what is he saying. Let's look at this example. Let's say there's a sandstorm. What is the meaning of sandstorm? In Arabic we say ajaj or ghubar. So let's say there's a sandstorm and your father is speaking to you. You cannot listen to him clearly. What you could pick is just the word windows. So now you know that there's a sandstorm, and you hear your father telling you or giving you an instruction to do something, and you could not listen to everything said. You just hear the last bit, which is windows. So in order to perceive, in order to understand speech, and now you don't have an access to the sound of the first 2 or 3 words. What you could hear is just the last one. So you heard windows. So now it is clear to you, because you already know that there is a sandstorm. It is easy for you to understand what is meant and what is the intended meaning. It is close the windows. Okay? How did you understand what your father has said? It is by the context. There is a sandstorm. You have used the context in order to understand what is your father has said. What your father has said, close the windows because there is a sandstorm. You have used the context in order to understand. So this is called top-down information. If it is difficult for you to remember which one is the context and which one is the sound, I'm going to give you a mnemonic. I'm going to give you a mnemonic which helps you to differentiate between them. Look at the word top. It starts with T. the word context ends with T. So context, top. So this is going to help you remember or differentiate between top down and bottom up. Top down begins with T, the context ends with T. So this means that the context, or this helps you remember that the context, the contextual information is top down information. Acoustic, it starts with A, bottom up starts with B. A and B follow each other in the English alphabet. So acoustic, bottom up, A and B. So hopefully this is going to be helpful to you as you are studying in the exam or studying for the exam to differentiate between these two kinds of processes or language processing, bottom up and top down. There's something called suprasegmental information. What do we mean by suprasegmental? The sound is not just phonemes. It's not just the, t, which are apart from each other. There's something called suprasegmental. What do we mean by suprasegmental? It is, as I said earlier, it is the analogy. If we can give the analogy, it is just like the music of language. As you are speaking, sometimes you raise your voice, sometimes you lower your voice, and this has a meaning. If you want to ask someone a question, you raise your voice at the end. For example, did you do the homework? So this is a raising intonation. This is a raise. Did you do the homework? So this is a raising intonation which is used in questions. So this is called suprasegmental information. As you are speaking, when you hear someone who is speaking to you with a raising information, you immediately know that he is asking you a question. Why? Because you have used suprasegmental information in order to understand the signal. Another example is trustee and trustee. For you, as a listener, when you listen to someone saying trustee and trustee, you start to realize that these two are two different words. They're not just one word. Why? Because trustee is a different word when we compare it to trustee. Now let's move on to the role of orthography in the perception of speech. So this is, as you are reading, orthography plays a role in understanding the message. So what do we mean by orthography? Orthography is the writing system of a language. Orthography is the writing system of a language. So researchers have found that phonology and orthography play an important role in the perception of written texts. For example, French learners of English, and this applies also to Arab learners of English, because in Arabic we don't have a phonemic contrast between p and b. The p like in pen and b like in ben. Ben is a proper name. Ben is a proper name, and pen is a pen, like this one. You know the meaning of pen. So this is a pen, ben is another word. So in French learners of English have difficulties identifying the phoneme p in words like absurd. If you try to read this word aloud, you can notice that it is written with a B, absurd, it is written with a B, but it is pronounced with P, absurd, absurd. In Arabic, we have a sept, we write it with B, but we pronounce it with P, a sept. You cannot say a sept, with the voiced one. You pronounce it with P, a sept. But since you don't have in Arabic, this might be your first time to realize this fact, that you say السبت, not السبت, that you say it with P, not with B. Try to say it now, and you will understand that you say it with P, not with B. Accept. Okay? Now let's do the exercise. Do we have a mismatch? No. So now let's do the exercise. Knowledge of the phonemic inventory of a language is not necessary for perception, necessary for perception, or necessary for production, or both B and C. If you know the phonemic inventory of a language, if you have the awareness, the linguistic awareness, the linguistic competence of the phonemic inventory, is this going to help you in the production, or is it going to help you in the production, or is it not going to help you, or is it going to help you both in production and perception? The answer is D. Why? Because knowing the phonemic inventory of a language is of course helpful in the production. If you know the phonemic inventory of a language, of course you are going to, if you go back to the previous lecture, you are going to see that knowing the phonemic inventory is necessary for production. And of course, as we have seen in today's lecture, the phonemic inventory is necessary for perception. So we can conclude that both perception and production make use of your knowledge of the phonemic inventory. Thanks very much for listening, and see you in the next lecture.